So every championship manager this season ranked in a tier list from worst to best. Let's go. What's up everyone, welcome back to a brand new video on the channel, a controversial video to say the least. I'm going to be tier listing every single championship manager this season. Now before we begin, on the left hand side of the screen is the tiers that I am going to put the managers in. So the top tier will be first class, the cream of the crop, the best managers this season, and hopeless are the managers that were completely hopeless in their position. So very self-explanatory there. If you guys like what you see, please make sure do give this video a like. It does tremendously help the channel. Let's aim for 20 likes in this video. That'd be tremendously appreciated. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done. It really helps the channel. Please share this channel to as many people as you can. All of that would really make my day. Without any further ado, let's start ranking these championship managers. Let's start the list with a manager that's actually survived the whole season, and that is Carlos Corberán. First time he's ever worked in a #1 role as a manager as well. And there has been some good within this season when he's had a lot of his players available, but majority of this season, when there's been injuries, Huddersfield and Corberán have both been really struggling. And I do think the lack of experience with him being the first team manager has shown in a couple of those games. There has been some good performances, don't get me wrong, but overall, Huddersfield falling down to 20th place with the squad that they do have as well. You can't deny that. I think for Carlos Corberán, it has been a pretty poor season on his part. There'll definitely be a lot more expectation next year. Now we go to Gareth Ainsworth, one of the first managers that got relegated this season with his team. But despite that relegation, he was managing a side like Wycombe with the smallest budget in the league. And I dare say, with the form he managed to give Wycombe near the end of the season, he gave Wycombe a fighting chance to survive. And I think you've got to really praise Ainsworth for that. There's a real squad unity, and I think one of the toughest things as a manager is to gain that squad unity. Unfortunately, it wasn't quite enough to survive, but they were 1 point off survival. I think he's done a decent job, actually. I would have given him a great manager, maybe even a first class if he got Wycombe to survive. Now we go to Philip Cocu, one of the first managers to get sacked in this season. It just started really poorly. And I know there were some injuries that didn't really help Derby at all this season. But even with that, the way that Derby set up, especially defensively, was really concerning. And I think part of the problem has been the transfer strategy and not being able to replace the players that they did sell in the transfer window. But at the same time, Cocu just didn't really have a distinctive tactic that was going to give Derby some points. Of course, Derby were in the bottom of the table when he got sacked, and I think overall, you've got to rank Philip Cocu as a pretty hopeless manager this season. We now move on to a manager that really had no time this season, Gerhard Struber. He only had 4 games in this championship season before Red Bulls managed to snatch him up in America. And for what I gather, Barnsley actually only picked up 1 point under Gerhard Struber, which was actually his final game in charge, which was against Bristol City, where Cauley Woodger got a last-minute equaliser. You can't fault how good he was with Barnsley last season to get them to survive and the dramatic turnaround he gave to that Barnsley side, but this season, to pick up only 1 point in 4 games is not very good at all, really. I probably would have to put him down as a poor manager. Probably a bit harsh, especially with the little games he's had, but based on the 4 games, that's probably where I would have put him. Now we go to Gary Monk, another manager that has left his role as a manager this season. Now he has an impossible task to try and overturn a 12-point deduction with Sheffield Wednesday. And to be fair, he picked up some great results. I think of a result against Bournemouth and the away win against Cardiff in the opening day of the season being fantastic results for Gary Monk and Sheffield Wednesday. Unfortunately, in between that, Sheffield Wednesday were just not picking up enough points quickly, and even when the points deduction got reduced, Sheffield Wednesday was still in the relegation zone. Based on the amount of defeats that Gary Monk also had with Sheffield Wednesday, it probably was a wise decision to let him go. So I think in that case, I think he was pretty hopeless. I think if he didn't lose as many games at the beginning of the season, then I would have definitely put Gary Monk up. Next, we've got another pretty controversial manager. We're going to do Jason Tindall and Jonathan Woodgate. We'll do Jonathan Woodgate first. So obviously, he is taken in charge of Bournemouth in the real late end of the season. And at that time, Bournemouth were 6th place in the championship table, looking like they were just about to fall out of it. Jonathan Woodgate had a pretty sticky start, but then he managed to get Bournemouth to establish themselves in the top 6 place, gaining 7 wins in a row, but then 3 defeats in a row in the final 3 games of the season. So Bournemouth were playing a bit inconsistently under Jonathan Woodgate. Then the playoffs came round and they got a good result against Brentford in the home game, winning by 1-0. But in the away leg, things just went completely wrong. Despite taking the lead, and if Woodgate just set his team up to be defensive and to limit Brentford's pressure for another 80 odd minutes, Bournemouth would be through to the playoff final. But following a very controversial penalty decision and of course a lack of mentality, for instance with Methven getting sent off and Begovic bringing down Tony, overall you can see that there were a load of cracks in that squad. And Woodgate had this problem with Middlesbrough last year as well, where a lot of players had a lack of discipline. I think I'm only going to give him an okay job. I think if he got Bournemouth to the playoff final, I would have given him a decent job. Now with Jason Tindall, obviously he took in charge at the start of the season. Bournemouth had a great start to the season and were unbeaten for quite a fair bit of the season until they lost 1-0 to Sheffield Wednesday. And it didn't help them for the fact they were down to 10 men in that game. And it was a Barry Bannon penalty, I think, where Sheffield Wednesday got the winner. And then pretty much in the turn of the year, Bournemouth just started creeping in more defeats. Jason Tindall eventually looks like that he was going to drop Bournemouth outside the top 6, and ultimately he did get sacked from Bournemouth. Overall, for the fact that Bournemouth stayed in the top 6 throughout his time, I'd say he's done an okay job. Now we go to Sabri Lamouchi. Now, I think some of you may even forget that he was a manager in this season, but he was sacked very, very quickly. In fact, I think on the same day when Gerard Struber left Barnsley as well. So, of course, he only had 4 games in charge of this season. But he got sacked, continuing the poor form he had in the tail end of last season. Overall, I think he's done a pretty hopeless job. Ultimately, that poor start really ruined their season. So, unfortunately, I'm going to give Lamouchi the hopeless rank. A lot of managers that I'm slating at the moment. Let's go to Mark Warburton, where I completely think of the opposite. I think he's done a terrific job with Queen's Park Rangers this year. Now, I won't lie, in the beginning part of the season, I remember when I did a score predictions video on Queen's Park Rangers versus Wycombe, I said if Queen's Park Rangers couldn't beat Wycombe, Warburton needs to go. And they drew 1-1, and I was saying, why is Warburton staying around? You've got to give QPR some credit. They waited to the transfer window. They wanted to see Warburton get some players in. Some of them being loan deals, albeit, but those deals made a huge difference. They had a complete turnaround to the season. 15 wins in their last 24 matches has taken them to 9th place in the table. Quite unbelievable, really. And with that form alone, I think Warburton's done a great job at Queen's Park Rangers. I think a lot of people are not really talking about Queen's Park Rangers, saying how well they did. I think it's gone a little bit under the radar. Very underrated manager. Next up, we've got Tony Pulis. Now, definitely one of the shortest reigns in charge, especially in terms of a manager being brought halfway through to the season. Lasted only 10 games in charge as well. Only 1 win in those 10 games as well. Under 1 point per game as well. It's really, really not good for the Sheffield Wednesday side, especially a side that needed to try and compete with the rest of the team with a points deduction on their shoulders. So for me, definitely for the fact that how Sheffield Wednesday couldn't kick on with Tony Pulis being in charge, I'm going to have to say he was pretty hopeless, unfortunately. Now we go to an intriguing manager, which I think a lot of people may have different opinions on, Vladimir Ivic. Now, obviously, he came in with a reputation where he was very defence-minded, but also he was very, very successful. When he joined Watford, he did get some great results at the start, but then I remember their first defeat against Reading and how little they created going forward, where I started to see the cracks forming in this Watford side. If they were to concede a goal, very, very likely that they would have actually lost the game, because in terms of goals, Ivic barely got Watford to score a goal. And I think for how underutilised some of those attacking players were just in Ivic's system, I think he's really let this Watford side down. And in fact, Watford could have stormed the league if they got rid of Ivic sooner. I'm going to say he's done an okay job. Watford was still in the top 6 when he got sacked, so he hasn't done an awful job. But I would say that with his managerial style, I just don't think it suited Watford. I just think it was a poor decision to bring him in. Next we've got Neil Harris, another manager that left pretty quickly within the season. Of course, he had to try and revive Cardiff from losing out in the playoff semi-final. And Cardiff were just very inconsistent. They lost in the open day against Sheffield Wednesday, but then they had a great win against Nottingham Forest. And then their form just was really inconsistent. I remember when they beat Luton by 4-0, thinking Neil Harris has just saved his job. But then all of a sudden, Cardiff go on 3 defeats in a row, and then Neil Harris gets sacked again. So unfortunately, he just couldn't get consistent performances out of his Cardiff side. And I think based on the position that they were in the table, I wouldn't say he was hopeless. He managed to get some good results and string a couple of good runs of form together. But overall, I think he's done a pretty poor job. Cardiff were around a lower mid-table position where he got sacked, which is definitely not where Cardiff should be based on the quality. And now we move on to Xisco Munoz. Of course, he came in to replace Vladimir Ivic in Watford. And all he simply did was change the formation back to a back 4. But what he also did as well, he also managed to push the players like Ismaila Sarr further up the pitch and actually utilise them to their proper strengths. Since Xisco Munoz came into Watford, no other side in the Championship has won more games and has picked up more points than Xisco Munoz. So I think following that, I think he's got to be first class. I think a lot of people definitely undermine the job he has done. I think he's done a fantastic job. Next we go to Neil Thompson. Obviously, he was actually caretaker manager of Sheffield Wednesday for quite a bit. For the fact he actually managed more games than Tony Pulis did, I am actually going to grade his managerial ability this season. And to be honest with you, Sheffield Wednesday picked up a lot of their wins under Neil Thompson. I think they picked up more wins from Gary Monk and Tony Pulis combined with Neil Thompson's spell. I remember when they beat Derby and they beat Wycombe Wanderers, and both of those wins by themselves actually gave them a fighting chance. And obviously, they actually got out of the relegation zone for the first time when Neil Thompson was in charge of Sheffield Wednesday. But Neil Thompson's form at Sheffield Wednesday did start to collapse a little bit. I think it was 7 games without a win that Sheffield Wednesday were, and then that's eventually when Sheffield Wednesday got Darren Moore in. I think I'm only going to give him an okay rank. He would have done a decent job if he got Sheffield Wednesday to clear out of danger from the relegation zone for me. Now we go to Gary Rowett. I think he's done a decent job. He hasn't shocked the world and has amazed people. It's a pretty average, pretty decent season for what you see in a typical Gary Rowett season. He's got Millwall to finish in 11th place. He has been a little bit unlucky with some of the players that got injured. I think overall, I'm going to give Gary Rowett a decent manager, not a great manager. If Millwall finished in the top 6 or just missed out on the top 6, I would have given Gary Rowett a great manager. Now we go to Alex Neil, one of the few managers that got sacked very late on in the season. Now I knew it was going to be difficult to pick up this Preston team up for the fact that they had a fantastic season last year, but unfortunately fell off in the final half of the season. Neil also had so many players in their final years of their contracts as well, which I think was also going through in the back of his mind as well. Unfortunately, with the max exodus that Preston went under in January, losing so many of their first team players, Alex Neil really couldn't recover. He went through a really poor run of form. Slowly but surely, Preston was starting to creep into the relegation battle. So Preston very abruptly got rid of Alex Neil and employed Frankie McAvoy, and since then Preston have not looked in any danger of relegation. And unfortunately, whilst it's been difficult circumstances for Alex Neil and Preston, and for how frustrating it must have been for him, I have to say, I think overall, I think he's done a pretty poor job as a manager, in my honest opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments. Now we go to Neil Warnock. Of course, he is still managing in the Championship, this time with Middlesbrough. And he got Middlesbrough to slightly miss out from the playoff picture. They were flirting with the idea for the playoffs for quite a fair bit of the season, but then they went through a poor run of form in January, where Middlesbrough lost 4 home games in a row. And that form in itself pretty much kept Middlesbrough away from competing in the top 6. But I think the improvement that Middlesbrough have made from last season, I think Neil Warnock's done a decent job. We now go to Mark Robins, who has stayed in the managerial role at Coventry. And you've got to give the Coventry boys some credit, because Coventry started the season a little bit slow, but then they picked up their form and got a bit of confidence in. And then following the transfer window and following some injuries to some first team players, Coventry did start to slip down the table a little bit. There was at one stage looking like that Coventry were going to be in the bottom 3. But Mark Robins, he's managed to galvanise his squad, managed to get the injuries back when he needed them, and he's told them, you've got to perform. And Coventry went through an unbelievable run in the end of the season, and following this, they finished in a pretty comfortable 16th place in the table. To have that managerial nous to manage to change momentum, but also managing to galvanise the team and to get them to focus and to get them to perform, I think he's done a great role with Coventry. I think especially with the circumstances they were put under with their stadium, I think he's done a great managerial role, and I'm really excited to see how Coventry will perform when they go back to the Ricoh Arena. We now go to Chris Hughton, one of the few managerial roles that got a job midway through the season. Now, he got to a Nottingham Forest side really low on confidence and a very over-bloated Nottingham Forest squad as well. And even he had some trouble to try and get some performances out of this Nottingham Forest side at the start of it, but eventually got a traditional Chris Hughton defensive style. And Nottingham Forest started to pick up some more occasional results, but he needs to offload some players, but he also needs to make sure that the squad are on board of his managerial style. I think with this season, based on the position that Forest were in and where they finished, I think he's done an okay job. I wouldn't say he's done a decent job, because then if he's done a decent job, then Nottingham Forest would have been a very, very comfortable position, heck, even a mid-table position. But for Forest to finish 17th, not a great finish whatsoever. But Chris Hughton did what he needed to do, which was to not get Nottingham Forest relegated. So he's done an okay job for me. Now we go to Dean Holden. Obviously, he was the manager at Bristol City at the start of the season. And Bristol City went through an unbelievable run of form at the start of the season, didn't they? But then all of a sudden, their form started to drop again. Typical streaky Bristol City. And unfortunately, when they went through that bad streak, they never looked like they were recovering. For me, if Dean Holden didn't have that great start to the season, I actually would have put him as a hopeless manager. And I think a bit similar to Carlos Corberán, has had good moments, but with his inexperience being a first-team manager, I think he has cost his side. So I think I'm going to put him in the same tier as Carlos Corberán, which has been in the poor category. Next up, we've got Tony Mowbray, a very controversial manager as well, which I think a lot of people have been having differing opinions on. For me, with that Blackburn squad, with the loan deals they got in and the quality they've got all around the pitch, they should be in around the top of the table, if not pushing for top 6. Now, they did at the start of the season, but then obviously they dropped off. Eventually, Blackburn managed to turn around their home form near the end of the season, which I think has papered over cracks. And for me, I think Tony Mowbray, with the squad he's had and the potential that squad has had, to have 28 goal a season striker in Adam Armstrong and to only finish 15th place, I think he's got to be in the poor category in my opinion. But let me know what you think about Tony Mowbray in the comments down below. We now have Aitor Karanka. Now, do I need to rank Aitor Karanka? When he came in, I was excited actually that Birmingham were going to be very resolute at the back. But that did not turn out to be the case at all. There were wars going on between the management and the players as well, which was very, very clear to see on the pitch. Following this, Birmingham did fall down just above the relegation zone, and following their poor form, they would have definitely fallen down in the relegation zone in the next couple of games. Birmingham sacked him very, very quickly when they looked like they were going to go in the relegation zone. For me, he's had a pretty hopeless season. There was never a stage in the season where I thought Birmingham were doing a pretty good job, unfortunately. Next, another manager that has appeared midway through the season, Nigel Pearson. And likewise, with Dean Holden, had an incredible start when he came in as a managerial role. Now, he didn't do too well at home, but away from home, they picked up some great wins. I remember their 3-1 victory against Swansea City, and they looked so good in that game. But unfortunately, at home, they picked up only 2 points in their last 8 home matches. They'd be feeling lucky that they didn't have fans in the stadium, otherwise they would have definitely been scrutinised. And I think with what Pearson has done, and for the fact that Bristol City were mid-table, and when Pearson's come in, he's put them all the way down to 19th place, close to the relegation battle, I think he's done a pretty poor job as well. We now go to Daniel Farke. Does there need to be any sort of debate here? I'm going to put him in the first class tier. Obviously, he would have the pressure with Norwich already being from the Premier League and getting relegated back down to the Championship. Norwich didn't have a great start either. You know, they looked pretty lackluster in their first couple of games, but Daniel Farke stuck with it. He was confident with his team, and overall, because of that confidence, the squad gained that confidence. For the fact they did get promoted and they stormed the league, I'm going to say Daniel Farke is only the second manager in the first class tier. Next, we've got Frankie McAvoy. Now, I was not expecting him to be actually given the Preston job for next season, but he has been given a job following the form he's actually managed to pick up near the end of the season. Preston picked up some great results under Frankie McAvoy, and especially with the squad that has been substantially weakened by the max exodus they had in the transfer window, and the transfers they did bring in January have played so much better since Frankie McAvoy has taken the charge as well. And for him to change the style as well, which I think is quite ballsy to do, and the fact that Preston are actually playing and thriving under it, you've got to say, I think he's done a decent job, because he made a real good turnaround to that Preston squad. Next up, we've got Mick McCarthy. McCarthy, he came in following Neil Harris getting sacked from Cardiff City, and he turned the Cardiff side in the lower mid-table into big contenders for getting into the top 6. There was a stage of the season where Cardiff were in the top 6. Unfortunately, when he picked up the manager of the month and he lost his following game against Watford, there were more defeats starting to creep into Cardiff's form. And I think for injuries as well that they sustained didn't help their momentum either. To go on to 12 games unbeaten and managing to get Cardiff so close for getting into that top 6 place based on the position they were under when Neil Harris left, you've got to say he's done a great job as a manager, Mick McCarthy. Next I've got Michael O'Neill, definitely another one with Mowbray, where I think a lot of people are going to have differing opinions on. Stoke fans are not completely too keen on him. I've seen a load of reaction on him on Twitter, and it's mainly negative reaction. To be honest with you, I think Stoke were unlucky with injuries, and I'm going to keep reiterating, but for the fact that the season was very condensed, a lot of squads really struggled with injuries this year. But if Tyrese Campbell wasn't injured as long as he was, then Stoke, I feel, definitely would have shot up the table. But unfortunately, Stoke really struggled with their form. And overall, based on the quality they've got in that squad and with the transfers they brought in January as well, you would feel Stoke should do better than 14th place. So for me, I think he's done an okay job. I wouldn't say a decent job. A decent job for me would be Stoke gaining around top 10. Next up, we've got Veljko Paunovic. Now, I think a lot of Reading fans will look at this season as pretty disappointing for the fact that Reading started so well, had a 7-point gap from Bristol City in October time, but to miss out in the top 6 entirely at the end of the season. And unfortunately, when Reading really struggled when a load of their main players were injured, I think that is when Reading really started to crumble down the table. They had a really tough end to the season as well, which I think didn't really help them either. For me, I think you still got to give Paunovic a pretty decent job. If Reading stayed in the top 6, then I would have said a great job that Paunovic has done. Next up, we go to Lee Bowyer. Now, I already talked about Artur Karanka about how much of a disastrous season he has had with Birmingham. But the reason that Birmingham have survived is from Lee Bowyer. He's had 11 games with Birmingham, 7 wins of those 11 games, only 3 defeats as well. And 2 of those defeats had actually come from when Birmingham already secured their championship survival as well. And you've got to give Lee Bowyer a huge amount of credit, because all of a sudden his Birmingham squad were actually performing at their full potential. Defensively, they were solid. And I think for the fact he managed to turn around a Birmingham City side that looked really low in confidence to survive a championship season in 18th place, I think you've got to give Lee Bowyer the great tier. Without Lee Bowyer, Birmingham would have been relegated. Next, another manager who I think will split opinion is Paul Warne. Now, obviously, he has been in charge of Rotherham in their last 2 championship seasons. He had this season where I think Rotherham's squad was the best squad they've had in the championship for quite a while, actually. But unfortunately, even when they did amass quite a fair few points in the beginning part of the season and they had all those games in hand, I think the COVID situation, the injuries and the tough fixture schedule, I think really got to Rotherham, unfortunately. But you can't help but feel, but with the quality that Rotherham did have, the opportunity they had to even just pick up 1 win in those games in hand would have definitely given them a very strong position to survive. The fact that Rotherham and Paul Warne couldn't grasp that opportunity, I'm probably going to be very harsh here, but I'm actually going to put Paul Warne in the hopeless managerial role. I'm just thinking if they had another manager, a very experienced championship manager with those games in hand, he definitely would have got this Rotherham side to win more games. I can guarantee it. Unfortunately, I just think sometimes his managerial naivety got the better of him. So that is why I put Paul Warne in the hopeless tier. Next up, we go to playoff final achieving Thomas Frank with Brentford. Now, it's going to be very difficult for Brentford to recover from that playoff hangover. I was expecting them to be what Leeds were going to be and actually storm the league and get promoted, which is why I predicted Brentford to be in the top 2. But unfortunately, it didn't turn out to be that way. They had a pretty poor start to the season. Then they went through 21 games unbeaten. And then Brentford went through another 5 or 6 games in poor form. And unfortunately, since then, it's been pretty inconsistent until the final 7 or so games of the season where they had to secure 3rd place, which they did manage to do. But when they lost track of Watford, they definitely started to struggle with their form. But despite that, Brentford are in a playoff final now. They've got a big opportunity to get promoted in the second time of asking of getting into the top 6. But as of today, I'm going to give him a great managerial role. Brentford could have completely collapsed and be what Nottingham Forest were and have a complete playoff hangover. But they didn't. They lost some quality as well aside Benrahma and Ollie Watkins, and they continued on 10 times stronger. So I'll give Thomas Frank the great managerial tier. We now go to Darren Moore, unfortunately being relegated with Sheffield Wednesday. Now, he didn't have a lot of time to save Sheffield Wednesday. He did pull off some fantastic results though, that 5-0 win against Cardiff being one of those results. Unfortunately, with Darren Moore as well, he also was ill for a lot of the time where he was in as well. So unfortunately, he couldn't even be on the touchline to help Sheffield Wednesday. So it's very difficult to rate Darren Moore. And I think the job he has done, he did put the race to the side to the final day of the season. And there was a stage where Sheffield Wednesday would have survived. So following that, I think I'm going to put Darren Moore in the okay tier. Now we go to Nathan Jones. Likewise with Mark Warburton, I think his managerial job has gone under the radar a little bit. I think with the budget that Luton have, he's done an unbelievable job to get them to finish in a mid-table position, a very comfortable mid-table position as well. Luton never looked like a side that they were challenging for top 6, and I think that's going to be the next stage for Luton to see if they can get into the really top part of the championship. But I think with the job that he's done, I think he's definitely overachieved for what Luton have got in terms of their squad. A lot of that squad is still the squad they had from when they got promoted from League 2 up to the Championship. I think he's done a decent job, you know. If Luton were actually pushing for around the top 10 and the top 6 places, then I actually would have given Nathan Jones a great, even probably debating first class. We now go to the other manager that has achieved the playoff final, Steve Cooper. Now, one thing you've got to really praise Steve Cooper is for how defensive he's got this Swansea side. It is so difficult to score against this Swansea side. That defensive stability is what's really got them to secure that top 6 place as well. It has been questioned at times, and of course, they went through their poor run of form, didn't they? But Steve Cooper, knowing that the team wasn't performing well, changed the tactics, changed the formation, and now Swansea are performing again. And I think to have that bravery and that experience, knowing that if something's not right, you can quickly change it, and knowing how to implement those changes into that squad as well, and to improve results like that, just goes to show how experienced and how much Steve Cooper is improving his managerial CV day by day. I think he's got to get a great tier. I think despite that poor run of form that Swansea did have, to improve it and to address it, I think he's got to get a lot of credit for that. We've made it to our final 2 managers. We now go to Wayne Rooney. Now, this one, I'll be very interested to hear where you rank Wayne Rooney. He came in with Philip Cocu, and when he came in, Derby stayed unbeaten for quite a fair bit, and actually Derby started to climb up the table, and they looked like they were actually going to climb in the lower part of mid-table. But unfortunately, when they lost 1-0 to Preston, which was Wayne Rooney's first defeat as manager, they started to creep more defeats in. Derby went through 6 defeats in a row, which ultimately got them to narrowly survive in the Championship season. Ultimately, a penalty has kept Derby County up. And I think for the fact they were antagonisingly close to going down, and with them having a very strong squad, I think I've got to give Wayne Rooney the poor tier. The fact that they were so antagonisingly close to going down, I don't think I could give him an okay tier, unfortunately. And the final manager we go over is Valérien Ismaël. I think for me, in contention to be Championship Manager of the Year, to get a Barnsley side that just survived on the final day of last season, and to really turn this Barnsley side around, to get them to push into new heights, a top 6 place, even though that Barnsley did lose out in the playoff semi-final. They put up one hell of a fight and were actually only 1 goal away for taking it into extra time. So for me, I'm going to give Valérien Ismaël the first class tier. Unbelievable job that Valérien Ismaël has done for Barnsley. So there you have it, guys. This is the tier list of managers. Let me know if you agree with them in the comments down below. Let me know what other videos you want me to do on the channel as well. I'll be very, very interested to know as well. But thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys enjoyed it, please make sure you do give this video a like. It does tremendously help the channel. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done. It does tremendously help. And please share this channel to as many people as you can. All of that would really make my day. But thank you guys so much for watching. You guys are legendary. Please don't end this video. And as always, take care, everyone.